We now continue with the cost of capital calculations. As you can recall, in the previous session, we covered calculating the individual sources of funds. We started by learning how to calculate the cost of equity or the cost of ordinary shares. Here we looked at the KE, cost of equity, using this formula, following which we then calculated the cost of equity using this particular formula, which is the CAPM formula. You will also understand that there is a cost of retained earnings. Please remember that the cost of retained earnings is not a free source of finance. So under equity, we have covered the ordinary shares, followed using the dividend model, and we covered the cost of ordinary shares using CAPM and retained earnings. The next equity finance that we are going to cover will be preference shares, and we are now going to calculate the cost of preference shares using this formula. After which we turn our attention to debt finance. We first start by calculating the cost of irredeemable bonds, bonds that are not redeemable by the organization. We then apply this formula to calculate the cost of irredeemable bonds. This is followed by calculating the cost of redeemable bonds using this formula, or alternatively an easier formula can be utilized using the Hawa-Nini-Bora formula. It is highlighted here. After this, we then calculated the bank borrowings, which is part of debt financing. Remember, bank borrowings is not traded and therefore has no market value. But because bank borrowings is part of debt finance, they enjoy 1 minus T, thereby bringing the cost of bank borrowings lower. Please pay particular attention to the 5 different sources of finance, and I will repeat them. The cost of equity finance, made up of ordinary shares, retained earnings, preference shares, and the cost of debt finance, made up of redeemable bonds, irredeemable bonds, convertible bonds, and bank borrowings. We now move on to calculating the WACC, which stands for the weighted average cost of capital. To do this, we have to decide whether we are going to apply market values or book values. In most instances, the question will ask you to calculate the WACC using market values. Why market values is because they are current whereas book values are historical in nature. If you notice what I have highlighted, market values reflect current requirements. We then move on to showing you the calculation of market WACC. In order to calculate the WACC, we need to find the average cost of capital of individual costs of capital by their proportions in the firm's capital structure. i.e., if the firm has equity finance made up of ordinary shares and preference shares, and within its capital structure it has got redeemable bonds and irredeemable bonds along with convertible bonds, we need to start by calculating the individual cost of capital, and then we weight the individual cost of capital by the total, as can be seen using this formula. Everything is weighted. The key word here is the weight. You will notice in the example in the next slide. Here, the cost of equity, preference shares, irredeemable debt, and bank loans are given. 16.9%, 13.4%, 9.7%, 8.7%, 8.8%. You will notice that the cost of equity finance is much higher compared to the cost of debt finance. This is because the cost of debt finance enjoys a tax shield 1 minus T. Right. If you notice here, I've highlighted, it reflects the risk return hierarchy of the financial securities. Using the information provided, 16.9, 13.4, 9.7, 8.7, and 8.8, we move on to calculate the weights. In this slide, we have to calculate the weights of each individual source of finance by the total market value. This is the total market value of the firm. This is the total market value of the firm. And we will multiply the cost of equity looking at the weights by the total market value of the firm. Hence, we find the WACC is 14.9%. This concludes this section showing you how to calculate the WACC. In the next section, we will do a lecture exercise which will be uploaded into Wibble. Please take out the lecture exercise and together I will show you how it is to be done. Thank you. See you in the next section.